Good evening. I was asked to speak from a farmer's perspective, just as a farmer in Dorset. So I am an arable farmer that produces his crops to red tractor standards, and I feed all my crops to a herd of pigs that are then sold through the RSPCA's assured animal welfare standards, of which they're about the highest in the world. So that's me. I happen to be an NFU member. I was asked to make 10 points and give you 4 tips. So I'm going to make 10 points and 4 tips. But it's quite interesting to look at this communities in living sustainably, and the first point they make is eat better. I've got no beef with that. Eat less meat. So I'm rather on the back foot. My first point is food self-sufficiency. I think it's a good thing. Currently in this country, we are about 70% self-sufficient in our food, of the food that we can produce. I'm not talking mangoes here. So that means that without imports, we'd run out of food in mid-August. Or put another way, we've got enough food for breakfast and lunch, but we've got to import our dinner. My message to you is this is not sustainable and needs to change. Point 2, food is the new medicine. If you come to the Oxford Farming Conference, you'll hear more about this. Eat properly and we'll spend less on health and the NHS. Wouldn't that be a good thing? Obesity is the health problem of our generation, but I think the problem's up here, not down here. In my view, gastric bans should be banned. Shadow Secretary for Agriculture, Secretary of State Kerry McCarthy, who I haven't met, says that meat eating is akin to smoking. She and I will disagree. Nonsense. Eating meat is good for you, in moderation. Becoming obese is akin to smoking. My message is eat responsibly. You spend about 9% of your disposable income on food. This is very low by any measure. It's one of the very lowest of all developed countries. A generation ago, you were spending 50% of your disposable income on food. If demand is so small, it's not surprising that your food suppliers are struggling. Now, a little bit of maths here. 70% of 9%, in other words, our self-sufficiency, is about 6% of your disposable income is being spent on British food. So my message is spend well on quality and buy British. Look out for the red tractor. People often say farming is a peculiar business. Yes and no. Frankly, it's like any other business. Yes, we need to make a profit to live, and it's great to see 1 or 2 other farmers in the area that have got that same issue. We have to make a profit. Profit is a good word, not a bad word. Out of interest, the harvest of 2015 is the first harvest for years in which it's been just about impossible to sell your crop for as much as it costs to produce. So it's very tough out there. Farmers are in the neck of an hourglass. They're squeezed between multinational suppliers and multinational buyers. And we've got very little clout, which is why I'm a member of the NFU. It's not rocket science. Risk levels are increasing, and margins are getting tighter. Don't believe me? Ask the banks. One point is really key. Land ownership is a very different activity from food production. Land values are determined by tax breaks and leisure for the rich. Food production is not. It's essential. If you've eaten today, thank a farmer. Or you'll use a doctor once in your life, a lawyer once in your life, a funeral director once in your life, and a farmer 3 times a day. Agriculture, farming is different in that our profits or our ability to make profit depend on somewhere else in the world having a disaster, which is nonsense, because when they have a disaster, supply and demand get out of balance and it enables us to make a profit out of someone else's doom, which is a crazy model. And my message is, it's a crazy model. Profitability is determined by production efficiency, cost control, and external forces. And it's up to us to sort out our production efficiency and control our costs. But we can do very little about the recession, and I say recession, that is going on in China at the moment. Demand for pig meat, and they own half the pigs in the world, has dropped so rapidly that they have, in the last year, slaughtered more pigs than live in Mexico, Canada, and the United States put together. But the amazing thing is that's still only 6% of their herd. Now that is affecting my profitability on my little farm in Dorset. The exchange rate. We all know now that the exchange rate is down at about 73, 74 pence. This time last year it was up in the low 90s. The exchange rate makes imports really cheap, and it makes my products as cheap because I've got to sell them the same price as imports. Very difficult to make a living. So that's another external influence that is affecting me at home, of which I have no control. This creates volatility in all agricultural markets, and in the pig market we have seen a reduction in price of 25% in the last 12 months. It's no different if you're a dairy farmer, it's bigger if you're an arable farmer. So my message is, this is not a whinge. I am not a whinging farmer here. It's just fact. We have to live with this volatility, and we have to learn to manage the risk. It's difficult, but it's a fact. So what's our response? How do we cope with this? Well, we all do the same thing, perhaps because we're not very clever people, but we try to become more efficient, and we try to produce more to cover the same costs. And that puts more on the market. We diversify, but that's quite difficult too in Dorset. We've heard about the AONB being 75% of the land area. So we at home tried renewables, planning. We're in the AONB, no go. So we become more resilient, and we do things like we use our own water off the land. We do things like reduce our labour bill by reducing the age of our staff so that they're cheaper. We have ingenious ways of paying less tax. And I don't mean getting a smart accountant. I mean remembering things like barter and cash. Just remember that VAT is 20% of everything we buy, and yes, we can reclaim the VAT, but if we can get away without the VAT, we can get away without national insurance. We are very resilient people, and we have to be. The message, though, is industry's response is to increase in scale, which may not go down well in this room, but that's what happens. And also increase in intensity, because if we become more intense, we have more of the external factors in our control, like temperature, like air quality, etc., etc. In other words, we put animals in building to gain more control. My next point, subsidies. Subsidies are very cheap. They're almost irrelevant, frankly. And I'd like to get shot of them completely. Per household, the CAP doesn't work out much more than the TV licence. So it's not a lot of money. But I do agree they need reform. If you're going to drop them, they need dropping globally. We've all got to be in the same boat together. If you're going to reform them, look at the public good. And I would suggest looking at the American model, where subsidies are paid to farmers on an insurance basis rather than on a flat rate basis as in Europe. And the vast majority of the US Farm Bill actually goes to support the poor through food and health programs. It's good stuff. Farmers provide a lot of environmental public goods, and most of this they do for free. Nature is essential. It ain't free. Give that idea up for a start. Nature costs money. If we're going to provide public goods, it needs to be on the long term. And the trouble with all these programs, we've heard they've just changed from Europe, and they change once every 7 years. They chop and change, and it makes it very difficult for a farmer to maintain the public good. but do be prepared to pay for them. We do respond to levers. So, for example, the old scheme, we at home had a 6 metre margin around all our fields. We've heard how complicated the new scheme is, so we gave up with that, and instead we grew beans because we were now allowed to grow beans. Now we had, on our little farm, we had £150,000 from you guys over 10 years for those 6 metre margins, and now they've gone. Now that, I think, is a complete waste of public money and shouldn't happen. My message on the countryside is that it needs to be a thriving, developing place, as it always has been. And please, AONB, listen up here. West Dorset District Council, listen up here. Please don't think that the countryside ought to be kept in aspic. It needs to be a developing place for people, as Rebecca said. That was point 7. Point 8.
Very few minutes left.
Yep. Society's input is absolutely essential, but the message is we need to think it through. We, as farmers, need to spend time engaging with you guys, our consumers. That's why I'm here. I've got to give you 2 examples, I'm afraid. This society's input can be really dangerous. In 1999, the UK decided to unilaterally ban things called sow stalls. So our sows had to be kept in open yards. Good thing, you think. Brilliant. Actually, sows are less fertile if they're kept in open yards. Not a problem, as long as you're going to pay more for the pork. What happened was Europe retained the sow stalls, and so we exported our industry to Europe. Our consumption of pork meat in the UK didn't go down at all. So you've just exported the problem, and you're buying just as much pig meat in sow stalls. It's a government and society-owned goal. The report, the Square Meal report, says that we import 75% of our protein crops, which is mad. We've got the second largest natural harbour down in Poole in the world, and it's filling up with a eutrophic algal bloom. But we're importing all these proteins because we're not allowed to grow them in Europe. South America's allowed to use genetic modification, so it can grow its soya cheaper than we can produce it in Europe. We used to grow GM soya in Spain and Romania. We're not allowed to anymore. So what society has done is exported the problem overseas. You are eating just as much GM as you were before that decision was made, and you're eating GM every day. So the message is, let's think it through, right through, together. We as farmers are very lucky. We have a Farmers' Centre of Excellence called the Agriculture and Horticultural Development Board, and we pay a levy in every year. It amounts to 65 million in total. It is world class, and it's there to provide the tools to assist growers to become more competitive. It's brilliant. It uses the best sort of technology around, and it's always doing a lot of research into more technology. My message is society should think about matching these funds, not through DEFRA. DEFRA is actually trying to withdraw all the time out of it. But if you're serious about this, match fund it, and together we can go forward. Technology is good. Technology is a good thing. We need to use the latest technology to increase efficiency and produce more from less. If we're really clever, we can produce just as much food from a smaller area. This year, the world crop for wheat and oilseed rape was broken by English farmers. But the wheat was still only 65% of the biological potential. Just think, if every farmer in the UK was producing wheat at 80% of its biological potential, we could release a huge amount of land. It's called eco-modernism, and it can provide fantastic gains for the environment. In an article in the Times recently, we were told that we could rewild the area the size of India if only we would get round and do it. So my message is, let's do it. You'll have to wait for my top tips.